Hey, welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith with the interview series presented by WFPK at WFPK.org, Consequence of Sound and the Consequence Podcast Network. Thank you so much for checking out the series. As always, if you're not already, you know the drill, hit that subscribe button. I put out 3 new interviews every single week. It's a great way to keep up with all of your favorite artists. And I got to tell you, I've got one massive legend on the line right now, Mr. Gary Numan, who's back with a brand new record called Intruder. Hi, sir.
Hello. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to see you again on here, and especially with another powerful record. You and I got to talk on the last one, and things didn't get better from there. That's
well, it did for me, not so much for the planet. Yeah.
Well, that's right.
The last one was at that climate change sort of core idea to it, and that looked at what humans would become. If it happens, if the catastrophe happens and the apocalypse comes along and, the earth is devastated by climate change, what would humans have to become, those that remained, to survive? How brutal would they need to be? How would that affect them? Would they be aware of how brutal they were compared to what life could be like? And so really, the last album, Savage, was kind of exploring the human condition 100 or so years from now. So I get a science fiction album, I guess. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to leave the science fiction idea with Intruder, but I wasn't sure how to go about it. What else could you say, or how else could you say it? And the seed of it was planted about two and a half years ago when my daughter Echo wrote a poem called Earth, and she was only 11 at the time, so it was a child's view of how the earth might feel. And in her poem, it's sad, and she's talking about people being horrible and all these sorts of things. But it's brilliant. For an 11-year-old, it's brilliant, and it was very understanding of the situation and showed a great deal of empathy, I think, for the planet itself. And I was really proud of her, and I thought it was lovely. But it planted that seed that maybe that's a good direction for the album. How does the earth feel? If it had a voice, what would it say? Is it disillusioned? Is it disappointed? Is it frustrated? Is it angry? Most importantly, will it fight back, or is it already fighting back? And then within that, there was the idea of viruses and so on. But this is before the pandemic, before the whole COVID thing had happened. I was well into the album, probably 3/4 of the way through, before the COVID thing happened. And so I started on that. Try to find different ways of expressing how I imagined the earth might feel, should it feel anything. And the intruder that the album talks about is us. It's people. We are the intruder. We are the virus on the planet, and the planet obviously understands it. Without us, it flourishes. So we are the problem, and so we are the thing that it needs to get rid of if it's going to flourish. So that's kind of the idea behind it. And then as that's all happening, so COVID happens, and in a horribly tragic kind of way, it just fed straight into what the album was already talking about. So I did write a song called The Gift, which is about COVID specifically, and it talks about this gift being something that would take your breath away, and it's also a bit sarcastic and in that way. But the album itself essentially was already there, and already the themes of it was already done, and most of the songs were already written, and it all goes back to my little kid's poem.
Yeah. And I don't want to get too much off topic, but she played a role on the last record. Wasn't she in a music video on the last time too?
Oh, that was another one. I've got 3.
Okay. This goes to show the family how it plays a part in your art. It's really nice.
Absolutely. Well, on Savage, my middle daughter Persia was singing on one of the songs, a song called My Name Is Ruin, and was in the video. And then when I toured that album, she came out to 20 or 30 shows at different times and guested on that song. So that was for me, that was amazing. I used to get really sort of dad-like and emotional about it every time she came out. I really did. A little tear in the eye. It's just lovely. On this album, she's on it again, but my older daughter Raven, who can also sing brilliantly, they were on it. They sung backing vocals on about 6 or 7 songs, and done a brilliant job. And Echo, the youngest one, doesn't think that she can sing, so she didn't want to do that. But she can, but she doesn't think so. And she did the poem. So I was able to get all of them on it in one way or another. Because on the sleeve, when you open the sleeve, I've written that poem. That poem's in it. Her Echo's poem is there, so it's part of the artwork. And my wife is involved, and she does she sort of finds all the clothes and does all the makeup and that for the album shoots and the video shoots and things. So it's a real family affair for
Yeah.
something so sort of depressing.
Well, if you got to find balance, right? And by the way, compliments to your wife too, because I mean, your image has always been a part of the arts, of the the complete experience for the fan at least, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and these end of world characters that I see, especially with Savage and with Intruder, I mean, it's so perfectly done. So some compliments there as well.
Oh my God, yeah, all credit to her for that. She's got an eye for
Yeah.
these. I mean, I used to do it myself, but God, she's light years ahead of me in knowing how to put things together. And she's really fussy. Getting dressed for a video now is a bit of an ordeal because she's moving this and adjusting that and changing that and tightening that and pulling that up. And I feel like a doll. But no, she's great. It's great as a family venture, as a little mini family adventure. Intruder is for me is a very, I know it's about a heavy subject and I know it's a sort of a heavy record, but behind that it was actually a really, really lovely experience for me.
Yeah. Well, it's on those heavy subjects, the subject at hand here, when you're writing from the point of view of the earth, as you said you do, is that the same thing as writing third person as a character study? Do you find, I mean, where do you have to let your imagination go to get somewhere that, is hypothetical, I guess?
Well, I just personalized it. If you was a human being and your children turned on you, how would you feel? If you was a human being and your children were systematically taking your house apart and trying to set it on fire, how would you feel? Would you feel disappointed? Obviously, would you feel betrayed? Or would you consider your children to be extremely ungrateful and stupid? Destroying the very thing that they live in. So it's very easy. You just make the earth a person, really, and then translate that back to being a planet again. It's all the same thing. It's all about feelings,
Yeah.
really. Taking the situation you have and then analyzing the feelings of it. The arrogance of humans and the stupidity of humans, coupled with the nurturing, the long, hundreds of thousands of years of nurturing that the earth has done to us, to see it just thrown back in its face and kicked while it was down. It's awful. So you just personalize that and it becomes, the difficult thing really was trying to find 12 ways of saying essentially the same thing.
Right.
Because it's a bit of a one-trick pony as an album. It's what would the earth feel? So I actually thought to begin with that might be quite difficult, but it wasn't actually. It is possible, easy actually, to find different ways, different angles on that same issue to look at. There's elements of bringing religion into it, how people relate to that, and how the destructive elements that can be, how that relates to the Earth's survival. There's one song called "The End of Dragons," which creates a sympathy between the mythology of dragons and what was done to them, and how they were eventually killed off to become myth, and how that could happen to the planet because we're doing exactly the same thing. So just trying to find different ways of looking at that same issue really what was the initial challenge, but as I say, it didn't turn out to be quite as difficult as I thought it would.
Yeah. When you're trying to drive home a point like this, and it is a very poignant point, do you allow for a sense of hope, especially, as I'll say, against all the people out there who hold some degree of manifest destiny belief, that seems to be the constant struggle?
Mm-hmm. I think as an album, it offers no hope whatsoever. There is no happy ending. There's no resolution at the end of it. There's no, if you do this, then this is going to be fantastic. I think the hope from it comes in that it adds to the conversation about climate change and about trying to keep it in the public eye. And I think the problem that you have with something like climate change, or the arguments about it, is that it becomes so normal. It becomes part of everyday conversation that you forget the importance of that conversation. It just becomes, is yet another program, is yet another song, isn't it? Yet another discussion about climate change, blah, 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 blah. And you forget that it's actually quite urgent. And it really does need to be sorted out, and some serious measures to be put in place. And so I think in a very, very, very small way, all Intruder does, and Savage before it, it contributes a very small element to that conversation to try to keep it vibrant, to try to keep it not just the background noise of everyday conversation, but something that spikes and stands out to the listener. Because I do think politicians bend because of public opinion. And if by these sorts of conversations you can keep bending public opinion to such a degree that they were forced to take notice and do something about it, well, then that's all you can do, really. Talking about us stopping flying in aeroplanes and having electric cars. I mean, I understand the thinking behind that, but really, that's just. I know it's meaningful and all that, but in the real world, it's just a little bit silly. The real change isn't going to come because I don't get on a plane. It's going to become for something much, much larger and more important and fundamental than that. And that's people in office, investing the trillions that need to be invested to change the whole way we go about energy and looking after the planet. And it's not even this generation that's going to do it. It's the next one that's coming along. So all we're really trying to do with this generation of leaders is to get them to slow it down enough to buy us enough time for the children that are coming along now, because they're the ones that are really going to do what needs to be done. We just need to buy them the time to get into office and start to do it. So Intruder is my tiny scratch on the surface of the giant rock that is this climate change conversation.
Yeah. And having people in leadership who set us back, it felt like decades, in the last 4 years. My hope is that at least, there's someone in there now that once again believes in this push forward and, trying to affect change in that way. But I'm also glad that you said what you did about the planes and everything, because that's one of the interesting things. I'm taking things probably a little bit liberty for context here, is that, you are a fan of technology. And when we hear about climate change and everything, there's where does technology fit into your future of this vision,
Yeah, I don't think technology is the enemy of saving the planet. I really don't. I think there are all sorts of technologies out there now, very advanced technologies, which are helping, in obvious ways. But I do think we need to be aware of the damage that these new technologies can do in the process of being created. So, I'm not an expert. All I do is write songs. I'm not an intellectual. I'm not a politician. I'm not a super smart person. I just write songs. And so I sometimes feel very out of my depth when we start to talk about things of this nature. So, as I say, my contribution to this is simply keeping the conversations alive. I'm not going to be able to pour out a whole world of scientific data and knowledge and impress you with how much I know about all this stuff, because I don't. And I'll be the first to admit it. But I do believe in it. I do believe that climate change is real. And I do believe that people should be frightened about what's coming. And I do believe that change needs to happen, and I think it needs to happen sooner rather than later. And as you say, the last 4 years, not only was nothing being done, but an awful lot was being undone. And so the damage, unfortunately, is more than the 4 years that we've had to live through. And what was undone will need to be redone, which will simply slow the progress that we're hoping it's going to come from the new administration. So it's been pretty devastating, to be honest. And I remember when I was making Savage, the first album, I actually was writing a book called Ruin, which is essentially the same idea as the album. I didn't know what to write the album about, so I borrowed a couple of ideas from the book Ruin, which was climate change based. And pretty much as I finished those first two songs, and they were really just to get me going, I had no intention of making a climate change album. But as I did that, so Donald Trump came along, started to say what he thought about climate change, how it was a hoax and it wasn't real and all this, I don't want to get into Trump debate, but nonsense, it was just ridiculous. And I found that frightening, that a country as powerful as America, a country so vital to saving the world as America, was suddenly not involved in the discussion at all, and was actively going against it in many areas, and I was really bothered by that. And so that guided me to make the entire album about that. Really bothered me so much. I just started writing more and more songs about climate change and about this future world and how brutal it was and how horrible it was. And you know, that was my sort of reaction to what Trump was doing, and that was savage. And here we are now with Intruders. I'm still on it.
Yeah, it's interesting, the connection between how you talk about science fiction and you know what you're writing about on this record. You know, when I looked at your back catalog, coincidentally, I don't know, but Outland turns 30 years old tomorrow, I believe, as we're recording this. And here's a record that has a lot to do with science fiction, you know, and what's going on in it. There's even a song in there from Russia, Infected. And I thought, oh my God. It's interesting how much, when you look back at the genre of science fiction, how much was dreamed up as outlandish and has come true. You know, does that play on your mind as you're writing this stuff? Did you consider the past in that way?
No, truthfully, no. When you're writing these things, I would be the last person to say that they're any kind of attempt at prophecy. For me, as a creative artist, you know, they are just quite often an extreme possibility of what's possible, not likely, perhaps. You know, because writing about what's likely isn't always as interesting as writing about something more extreme that's just vaguely possible. You know, there's tend to be a little bit more drama in the extreme end of things. So even with the very beginning, I think my second album was called Replicas, and that was a science fiction based record, and that was primarily about what London might be like in 50 years' time. Mm-hmm. I'd read an article somewhere about a particular sort of violence that was going on at that time. People traveling on the underground trains and getting off and beating up anybody that was there, getting back on the train and disappearing. It was horrible, you know, so many things are. And it bothered me, and I thought, you know, what on earth can you do to fix that level of violence and that desire to just want to hurt people for fun? And back then, you know, the idea that people are the problem was very much part of that album, as it is with Intruder, but for a different reason. So back then, the idea was, how do you bring people into line? Because you just get rid of them, get rid of people. Mm-hmm. Everything runs smoothly without people. So Replicas was about developing a machine or a computer that would, you know, in theory, run everything, and it would re-educate the lesser educated people by bringing them up to that higher level. And all it did was actually got rid of them. You know, so bit by bit, before the more intelligent people realized it was too late, there weren't enough of you left to do anything about it, and so you wiped out humanity. So, and here I am again with Intruder, doing something not massively dissimilar, because, you know, so I think if there's ever been a recurring theme in my stuff, is that people are the problem. You know, well, people are just awful, aren't they? Just,
you know, but here we go. It was this week, and we knew this was coming, but now we have, you know, we've had AI music for a few years now, but now that, you know, I don't know if you've seen this AI rapper, you know, artificial intelligence rapper. No, the entire song was constructed by a computer, and it's I say intelligent in that it makes sense. What, you know, and however it's done with algorithms. And here it is, the whole song, music, lyrics, vocal, everything is constructed by the computer.
Right.
Once again, you might not be trying to prophesize, but there it is. And as an electronic artist, especially, you know, I would be curious your thoughts on that, because, you know, where you started writing the music, this futuristic music, you know, 40 years ago, and again, here we are in this age where robots don't need us.
Yeah, I did a song called I did one called Metal, actually, which is about a machine that wanted to be human. That was back in '79. There's another one called ME, which stood for mechanical engineering. And you know, there's always songs about, you know, the last man on Earth and missing the love of his life and all that stuff. And I used to wonder, you know, if you was a robot, or not a robot, just a machine in general, but you were self-aware, you know, you had feelings, how would you feel if you were the last thing left, you know, just sitting there gathering dust with no reason for being, but you couldn't die? you live forever.
Yeah.
You know, so I wrote about that. So I mean, I've always been interested in technology, but always with feelings attached. You know, the cold Android sort of thing has never been that great, much of an interest to me really. And I think maybe that's because I've got aspergers, and so emotionally, I've never been comfortable, but I've never reacted emotionally in the way that other people think I should, or that's always appropriate. So I've had to really, really try to learn how to behave in emotional situations. And so I have this fascination with emotion because it's coupled with a lack of understanding of how most people react, or how most people feel emotionally. I feel them just the same as you. Arguably, I feel them more, in my opinion. But the way I feel them and the way that is expressed is different, and it can be unfortunate. And so there is this sort of lifelong fascination with emotion and technology. And so the fact that I would write about machines that are struggling with emotions makes perfect sense to me. You know, and again, it wasn't meant to sort of be prophecy or prophetic in any way. It's just a lifelong kind of interest because of my own problems and my own interests sort of combining. And I can write songs, so you know it finds its way into songs. Obviously, that's my outlet for the things that you're concerned about. But it's been there pretty much throughout. Really, I got really absorbed into religion for a while. No, I'm not religious at all, and so I got really kind of obsessed for about 3 or 4 albums of just writing about God and religion and different ways that affects and why I didn't believe it. And I did one album about what if I was wrong and it was true, you know, if there was a God and yet all this stuff happens, how terrifying would that be? You know, that it was allowed to happen by design almost. You know, whoa, that would be scary. You know, at the moment, everything bad is assigned to the devil and God is great. You know, well, the rights and wrongs of that is, you know, that's open to debate. But, you know, I was really fascinated by that for a little bit. But then, you know, even that's on Intruder. There's still an element of that on Intruder. So, I for quite a while, I seemed to sort of shy away from the science fiction thing. I stopped reading it for a start. I mean, I don't think I've read science fiction in about 30 years now. But it sort of finds its way back because I am fascinated about what's coming. I got no interest in nostalgia or retro. I'm not interested in songs I wrote yesterday. You know, I'm interested in where I'm going, where the world's going. I'm fascinated by technology, so that's always a part of it. But I'm fascinated by religion and the way people feel about that. I'm clearly bothered about climate change and so on. But it's all about what's coming and how will that play out. You know, how will that evolve and what other things will affect that. And, you know, that will find its way into the music that you make because that is your outlet.
It's an interesting, it's almost like being a sociologist in a way, your point of view on humanity in that sense.
Yeah, if I was clever, I'd write some really good songs about it.
I believe you have, sir. I believe you have. I know we're running short on time here. I do want to quickly ask about the music on this record, because to reflect what you're singing about, did you have an ultimate vision of what that should sound like as well?
You have a broad outline when you start of the palette, if you like, of sounds that you imagine, creating the audio descriptions of what you're trying to be talking about. So, but it's pretty vague. But a lot of it is experimentation along the way. Sometimes you'll come up with a sound that is an amazing sound, but it just doesn't really quite gel with what else you've done. So there's a lot of decision making along the way. And so yes, there's like a very broad. It's very much like finding the very outside of a blank jigsaw puzzle. You get all the straight edges in, but the rest of it you don't really know. You know, but you know it's going to be within there somewhere. That's the best way I can think to describe it, really. But it doesn't feel as if it's too contrived from day one. Just that broad outline. That's all. And then the fun of it is filling in the blanks and seeing what picture you come up with, because you know what story you're trying to tell with that picture. But are you going to come up with the right picture that tells it clearly?
Yeah. Well, I know you had some fun with those, finding the sounds and everything. I'm looking at the word Yebahar. Yeah, Yebahar. Is that how you?
Ever, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What an
That's amazing.
interesting looking instrument.
That's, isn't it just?
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'm blown away to have that on a record. That is a genuinely unique thing, one of a kind thing.
Mm.
And Gorkum, who plays it, who invented it, he's the only one that can play it. So, that is about as unique as you get. And I love Middle Eastern music anyway, so it has that Middle Eastern vibe to it, and it's on 3 songs in a record, and it was just perfect. And yeah, I mean, that was a real thing for me to have that on it. I was really proud of it.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing, again, it's another powerful statement to, especially if followed up what you did last time for another part of that story. Intruder is such a good, great, and cool album. So thank you so much for continuing to do the music. And Gary, it was always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you around. Take care.
Bye-bye, man.